On First at 9 this Monday the 15th of December 2025. Emergency aid. World Bank offers $120 million in emergency aid to Sri Lanka. GDP boost. Sri Lanka's GDP records a 5.4% growth in the third quarter of this year. Gloomy forecast. Rains expected to intensify from tomorrow, says the Met Department. Families evacuated amid renewed landslide risks. Arrest imminent. Former chairman of the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation granted bail following earlier arrest. Bribery commission to arrest former minister Arjuna Ranatunga.
Kalin baby so rupial anuwakata. Kalin baby podi hamotamai.
From Derana, this is Derana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to First at 9 on Sri Lanka's premium news provider, Derana News Channel. I'm Tharindu Mahendra joining you live with the latest in Sri Lanka and around the world. We begin with your top story this evening. The Department of Meteorology forecasts a slight increase in rainfall across the island starting tomorrow. The expected increase in rainfall is attributed to the influence of easterly wave flow. Meanwhile, the Navalapitiya-Kandy main road, which was blocked by a landslide for 18 days, was reopened for traffic today.
Reports are being received on the damage caused by Cyclone Ditwa, which has severely affected several parts of Sri Lanka. The remains of a 7-year-old girl who went missing following a landslide in the Thannewath area in Beranava, Yatiyantota on November 27th was recovered today. Meanwhile, nearly 100 houses in the Hantane area of Kandy have either collapsed or at risk of landslides. Residents of 75 vulnerable houses have been relocated to a safe centre. There's also a risk of large boulders from Glen Alpine Mountain at one end of the Namanukula range falling towards the Imbulgoda area in Badulla. As a precaution, 56 people belonging to 18 families have been moved to the Imbulgoda Community Hall. The Spring Valley Divisional Hospital has been temporarily closed due to the risk of flooding. The Sungala Road leading to the historic Somavati Shrine is once again flooded in the Diggal area following heavy rainfall. Restoration work following the disaster is currently underway with the support of several agencies, including the Road Development Authority. The Navalapitiya-Kandy main road, which was blocked for 18 days due to a landslide, was reopened to traffic at 7 a.m. this morning. Renovation work is also ongoing on the Peradeniya Katugastore Road. 316 roads were damaged due to this disaster. We have reopened 302 roads for transportation. We only have another 14 roads to repair. Meanwhile, restoration work from the Polonnaruwa Batiklo railway line between Manampiti and Gallalla, which was damaged by the overflowing of River Mahaveli, is currently in progress with the support of railway employees and Sri Lanka Army personnel. Repairs are also underway on the Anuradhapura-Jaffna section of the Northern Railway, which sustained damage at several locations due to flooding. In the severely affected Badulla district is being carried out with the assistance of voluntary organizations. Minister of Plantation and Community Infrastructure Samantha Vidyaratna stated today that the 25,000 cleaning subsidy has been provided to 5,040 disaster-affected families. The Disaster Management Centre reports that the recent disaster have claimed 643 lives while 183 remain missing. Meanwhile, the Department of Meteorology forecast a slight increase in rainfall across the island from tomorrow. Accordingly, several spells of showers will occur in northern, north-central, eastern, Uva and central provinces. Showers or thunder showers may occur at several places in other areas of the island after 1 p.m.
දවටනේ නියම මිල සඳහන් ස්විස්ටෙක් නිෂ්පාදන මිලදී ගන්න. ස්විස්ටෙක් ගන්න ඕන හොඳම තීරණය.
School academic activities halted during the devastating cyclone Ditwa will resume tomorrow in selected areas. However, 640 schools in the Uva, Central and Northwestern provinces, which were severely affected by the adverse weather, will remain closed. Meanwhile, the Sri Lanka Transport Board has extended the validity of bus season tickets issued for school children for November for the duration of this month.
A cyclone Ditwa wreaked havoc across Sri Lanka, triggering heavy flooding and deadly landslides across the country. Measures were taken to close schools nationwide. The second phase of the third school term, which was initially slated to commence on the 8th of December, was subsequently postponed to the 16th of this month. Accordingly, 147 schools in the western, southern, northern, north central, eastern and the Sabaragamuwa provinces will resume academic activities tomorrow. However, the Ministry of Education notes that 640 schools in the Uva, central and northwestern provinces will continue to remain closed tomorrow.
Officials of the relevant provinces disclosed that a total of 640 schools in the Uva, central and northwestern provinces will remain closed tomorrow. 524 schools in the Uva province will be closed primarily due to difficulties associated with transportation. 5 schools in the northwestern province and 111 schools in central province will also remain closed tomorrow. A relaxed policy on school uniform has been recommended, allowing both teachers and students to temporarily attend school without uniforms. However, this policy is only applicable for those directly impacted by the disaster.
Schools will once again be closed for the Christmas holidays on the 22nd December and will resume the third phase of the third term on December 29th. Academic activities for the third term of 2025 are expected to conclude on the 31st of December. However, Muslim schools which will commence academic activities tomorrow will continue until the 2nd of January 2026. Meanwhile, the Education Ministry has instructed all schools to commence grade 1 classes for the 2026 academic year on the 22nd January. The ministry further noted that temporary accommodation should be provided in schools with hostels for students residing in remote areas where transportation is challenging due to the disaster situation. In a bid to provide relief to the students in disaster-struck areas, the ministry has instructed authorities to allow disaster-affected students to attend the nearest schools to continue their studies with no fees being charged from such students. The Education Ministry clarified that no charges can be levied from students for disaster relief purposes and that only students above the age of 14 can only be used for disaster assistance services with parental permission and under the complete supervision of teachers. The ministry stated that schools that will remain closed tomorrow can resume academic studies on a date decided by the relevant provincial directors of education. With schools slated to reopen tomorrow, principals, teachers and non-academic staff arrived at the school premises today. In the meantime, Deputy Minister of Labour Mahinda Jayasinghe joined clean-up operations conducted at schools in Kandy.
Nearly 260,000 principals and teachers have pledged their support to assist those affected by the disaster. They have made a request to donate 1 day's salary from January next year. A mechanism will be implemented to facilitate this donation after schools reopen tomorrow.
Given the inconveniences faced by students, the government announced that school children can continue to use SLTB season tickets issued for November for bus journeys in December.
From tomorrow, students are not required to wear school uniforms or use season tickets when traveling to school. The only requirement is the willingness to attend school. SLTB buses have been deployed to facilitate student transportation, and this arrangement will remain in effect throughout the month of December.
International support for Sri Lanka's disaster relief efforts continued today with an Indian Air Force C-17 aircraft delivering 25 metric tons of humanitarian aid, including essential medicines and dry rations to Bandaranaike International Airport. Meanwhile, local and expatriate Sri Lankan communities continue to contribute to the government's Rebuilding Sri Lanka Fund.
An Indian Air Force C-17 Globemaster aircraft carrying 25 metric tons of aid for distribution among disaster-affected communities in Sri Lanka arrived at Bandaranaike International Airport yesterday. The aid consignment included stocks of 17 essential medicines and dry food items. After the aid was unloaded, hospital staff, including Indian doctors who served at the field hospital in Mahiyangana, departed Sri Lanka on the same aircraft. Speaking prior to the departure, Minister of Health and Mass Media, Dr. Nalin Jayatissa, expressed gratitude for their dedicated service.
7000කට වැඩි ප්‍රමාණයක් රෝගීන්ට ප්‍රතිකාර කළා. ඒ වගේම තවත් 100 ගානකට මේ ශල්‍ය කර්ම කරලා තිබෙනවා. ඉතින් මේක මේ වෙලාවේදී අපිට ඉන්දියානු රජය පැත්තෙන් ලැබුණු ඉතාම විශාල සහයෝගයක්.
Following the conclusion of the search and rescue operations to locate victims of the disaster, troops from United Arab Emirates along with vehicles and equipment used during the operations were transported back to Abu Dhabi yesterday aboard a special cargo aircraft of the UAE Air Force. Additionally, an Indian Air Force Mi-17 helicopter deployed on relief operations departed the island yesterday after completing its mission. Opposition leader Sajith Premadasa met the Asian Development Bank's country representative in Sri Lanka, Takafumi Kadono, today at the opposition leader's office in Colombo. The opposition leader expressed gratitude for the role played by the Asian Development Bank in providing relief to people affected by Cyclone Ditwa and requested the bank to continue its assistance to Sri Lanka in the future. Country representative Takafumi Kadono assured that ADB would continue to support affected communities. A consignment of humanitarian aid donated by Government of Pakistan to support disaster-affected people arrived at the port of Colombo aboard a special vessel. The consignment includes essential medicines as well as large quantities of powdered milk and nutritional supplements aimed at boosting immunity. Additionally, the assistance comprises tents, blankets, mosquito nets, bedding materials, water pumps and a range of other essential items, along with lighting equipment intended for use by displaced and disaster-affected communities in camps and households without access to electricity.
මේ වගේම වුන් පොරොන්දු වෙනවා මේ මානුෂ්‍ය ආධාර වලින් පස්සේ පාලම් ඇතුළු අනිකුත් යටිතල පහසුකම් වල සංවර්ධනය කිරීම සඳහා අවශ්‍ය ආධාර ලබා දී කියලා.
Meanwhile, another Indian vessel carrying 50 metric tons of dry food items dispatched as part of Operation Sagar Bandhu arrived at Colombo port this afternoon. Meanwhile, the Sri Lanka Automobile Exporters Association in Japan donated 25 million rupees to provide relief to those affected by the disaster. In another development, 21 estate workers from the lower Hapugastana division in the Mausakale area of Muscalia donated 1,000 rupees each from their wages to the government's Rebuild in Sri Lanka fund.
30% discount on Arpico Farm and Spring mattresses available at Arpico Supercenter and Arpico Daily.
Musa Phoenix Natal Fiesta November 13 සිට 16 දක්වා අනුරාධපුර ස්පොට්නික් ක්‍රීඩා පිටියේදී.
The 16th session of the National Council for Disaster Management convened this morning at the Presidential Secretariat, chaired by President Anura Dissanayake, and focusing on restoring normalcy in the aftermath of Cyclone Ditwa. During the meeting, the President ordered that the 25,000 rupee cleaning allowance be promptly provided to affected households, with disbursements to be completed within this week.
During the meeting, the Council approved the establishment of a National Disaster Management Integrated Mechanism and discussed amendments to the Sri Lanka Disaster Management Act No. 13 of 2005. A committee for the coordination of foreign aid was also approved with powers to ensure transparency in handling all international relief supplies. To reduce landslide risk in estate areas, the Council called for drainage system rehabilitation projects led by the NBRO in coordination with estate owners, local authorities and other stakeholders. Technical teams will also prepare a central fragile area management plan, integrate data from all agencies and develop a unified digital platform for disaster preparedness. President Dissanayake stated that 15,000 houses located in high-risk zones have been identified under the government's program to provide a permanent solution for protecting the Central Highlands. He added that the construction of 8,000 houses is expected to be completed by the end of 2026. The President also instructed officials to resolve issues delaying the disbursement of the 25,000 rupee flood cleaning allowance and complete payments within the week. Meanwhile, Treasury Secretary Dr. Harshana Surya Peruma revealed that the government has recorded a loss of 5.79 billion rupees, as although 7.5 billion had been paid as compensation for the 2016 floods, reinsurance recoveries only amounted to 1.42 billion rupees. The President emphasized that any continuation or revival of the insurance scheme must be beneficial to the government and provide maximum protection to beneficiaries, adding that expert advice should be sought and necessary amendments introduced.
The World Bank Group has announced up to $120 million in emergency support for Sri Lanka to assist recovery efforts following Cyclone Ditwa. In a statement, the World Bank said the funding will be made available at the government's request by repurposing funds from ongoing projects. The assistance will support the restoration of essential services and infrastructure facilities in the worst affected areas. Meanwhile, the International Finance Corporation is expected to continue supporting the private sector through advisory services and strategic investments to generate employment and boost economic recovery. A global rapid post-disaster damage estimation assessment is already underway to guide recovery planning, while the World Bank said it is also working with the government on broader recovery efforts, including the proposed Rebuilding Sri Lanka Fund. The Manusat Derana operation to distribute school supplies to children affected by the recent disaster is currently underway. Contributors arrived at the TV Derana headquarters in Colombo to donate books, bags and other essential school supplies today as well. Manusat Derana continues to ensure that the donations are promptly distributed among school children in the worst affected areas. Deputy Minister of Finance Professor Anil Jayantha claims the government's anti-corruption initiatives are encouraging the public to fulfill their tax obligations. He made these remarks during the appointment of newly selected executive officers of the Inland Revenue Department.
Letters of appointment were presented to 100 newly selected executive officers of the Inland Revenue Department today in Colombo. The ceremony was presided over by Minister of Labour and Deputy Minister of Finance and Planning, Professor Anil Jayantha Fernando. According to the data we are receiving, I expect the revenue target to be exceeded by at least 50 billion rupees. I believe this is a historic achievement for the Inland Revenue Department. The government's main objective is to widen the tax base and increase tax revenue. Meanwhile, as a policy decision, the government is also aiming to reduce tax rates. To achieve this, there are two key priorities. First, simplifying the tax system, and second, strengthening tax regulations and administration. Additionally, I hope a system will be implemented to inform the public how their tax money is being utilized. Although the Inland Revenue Department collects taxes from the public, there is often reluctance to pay taxes. This is a common situation, particularly when there has been experience of governments failing to use tax revenue for the benefits of the public, or when systems are perceived as corrupt or misused. Therefore, we must demonstrate that misuse is no longer taking place. We have demonstrated this by maintaining fiscal discipline throughout this year. Under this government, corruption has been eliminated. As a result, the public is encouraged to pay taxes. Consequently, a government that was previously criticized and accused of being unable to govern or of intending to acquire public lands has succeeded in breaking all income tax revenue records.
Welcome back to First at 9. Leader of the opposition Sajith Premadasa calls for reforms to the Disaster Management Act and improvements in disaster forecasting, preparedness and public communication, citing the inaction of the disaster management system. He made these remarks following the donation of hospital equipment to the Dambadeniya Base Hospital under this SJB's HUSMA initiative.
Under another iteration of Samik Janabalavagia's HUSMA initiative, hospital equipment worth 2.9 million rupees were donated to Dambadeniya Base Hospital. The event was presided over by the opposition leader Sajith Premadasa. Despite warnings being issued 2 weeks prior to the disaster due to the inaction of the disaster management system and other responsible authorities, the human rights of a significant number of citizens were violated. The current disaster management mechanism and the Disaster Management Act must be reformed. The system must be improved across all stages, including disaster forecasting, preparedness, public information and communication.
Pivituru Helorume leader Uday Gammampila asserts that foreign assistance gathered by the government thus far corresponds to less than 1% of the total expenditure expected to be incurred in rebuilding Ditwa-ravaged Sri Lanka. His remarks came hot off the heels of an ongoing debate, with several public representatives expressing dissenting opinions on the extent of the destruction and the financial requirements for post-cyclone reconstruction. According to the Commissioner General of Essential Services, Prabhat Chandrakirti, the estimated cost of rebuilding the country is between $6 billion and $7 billion. However, Treasury Secretary Dr. Harshana Surya Peruma states that as at December 13, total foreign aid received amounts to just $11 million. This means that only about 0.17% of the required funds have been secured so far. In contrast, following the devastations caused by the 2004 tsunami, the country was able to obtain nearly 87% of the total reconstruction expenditure through foreign assistance. Today we have not been able to secure even 1%. Why is this the case?
අපි දැක්ක අනුරකුමාර දිසානායක මහත්තයා
We saw President Anukumar Disanayake come to Parliament and speak about relief measures like Santa Claus, drawing applause for himself, and then go on visits to villages. But now the reality is slowly becoming clear. Even after 18 days have passed since the disaster, how can one realistically distribute 5 million or 10 million rupees? Just do the calculations and tell me how many oil tankers can actually be imported with the money received through the Rebuild in Sri Lanka Disaster Fund. It would not be even enough to import half an oil tanker.
තෙල් නැව් භාගයක්වත් ගිහිල්ලා නැහැ. හරි. ඉතින් මේ විදිහට විධිමත්ව ක්‍රමවත්
The opposition appears to be in disarray whenever the government functions effectively, and they seem deeply unsettled at the moment. In fact, looking at the situation now, it almost appears as though the opposition has suffered the greatest setback, having slid into political collapse themselves.
විපක්ෂය තමයි නායක ගිහිල්ලා තියෙන්නේ.
ඒ අයට සුලිකුණාටුව බලපාන විදිය
If the government seeks to reaffirm its public mandate at the polls, we will be able to witness firsthand the impact of Cyclone Ditwa. If promises are made and not fulfilled, the government will be forced to face the people on the streets. Beyond compensation, the damage to infrastructure alone is estimated at around 900 billion rupees. This is not an easy task by any means. I do not believe that even $100 million have been collected so far.
එකතු වෙලා තියෙනවා කියලා ඉවරලා.
මම දැක්ක හිටපු ජනාධිපතිවරු
Even former presidents have contributed without hesitation. Such actions are unprecedented. These events reflect the trust that has been placed in us. The international community and various organizations are extending financial support to the country. A strong sense of confidence has been instilled in the government, and the government is managing this situation very successfully.
මේක කළමනාකරණය කරමින් යනවා.
Police revealed that the brake system of the vehicle driven by former Speaker of Parliament and National People's Power MP Ashoka Ranwala, which was involved in an accident that injured 3 others, has not been properly maintained. Police adds that the results of the blood tests conducted to determine whether the MP was driving under the influence are yet to be received.
An SUV driven by former Speaker of Parliament and National People's Power MP Ashoka Ranwala collided with a car and a motorbike in the Sapugaskanda area last Thursday. 3 occupants of the car, including an infant, sustained injuries in the accident. MP Ashoka Ranwala, who was also injured, was arrested by the police while receiving treatment at the Colombo National Hospital and was later released on bail. The case is scheduled to be taken up for hearing before the Mahara Magistrates Court on the 19th of December. Police spokesperson ASP FU Wootler stated that the results of the blood test to determine whether the MP was driving under the influence of alcohol at the time of the accident are yet to be received. However, the vehicle inspection report indicates that the brake system of the SUV driven by MP Ranwala had not been properly maintained. In this context, several political parties commented on the matter today.
There are allegations that the MP was under the influence of alcohol at the time of the accident. If there is any such suspicion, it is the responsibility of the police to conduct a proper investigation and determine whether he was intoxicated or not. However, people who were present at the scene say they have become aware that the police were forced not to conduct the relevant test. What is the purpose of conducting a test 2 days after the accident? The public too might urge the police to enforce the law on them according to the standard applied to Ranwala, requesting to undergo sobriety test 2 days after an incident. To my knowledge, as an attorney, if there is a suspicion that the driver was under the influence at the time of the accident, police are required to conduct a sobriety test immediately. However, deviating from the standard protocol, police have introduced a practice where the suspect is tested for intoxication 24 hours after the accident. We are aware of who our comrade Ranwala is politically. The law should be applied equally to Ranwala as the driver of the vehicle, and we have no objection to that. However, we strongly condemn the misinformation being circulated regarding Ranwala. The party will take responsibility for Ranwala in his role as a politician.
Former chairman of the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation, Dhammika Ranatunga, who was arrested by the Bribery Commission today, was later granted bail by the Colombo Chief Magistrates Court. Ranatunga was arrested on charges of causing a loss of approximately 800 million rupees to the Petroleum Corporation by cancelling 3 long-term fuel procurement tenders for 2017 and 18 and instead awarding spot tenders at higher prices. Following the arrest, he was produced before Colombo Chief Magistrate Asanka S. Bodaragama, who ordered Ranatunga's release on 2 sureties of 1 million rupees each. The magistrate also imposed a travel ban on the suspect and advised him to refrain from influencing witnesses. Meanwhile, the Bribery Commission informed the court that it intends to arrest former Minister of Petroleum Resources Development Arjuna Ranatunga and present him before the court as a suspect in the case. Australia vowed stricter gun laws today as it began mourning victims of its worst mass shooting in almost 30 years. Australian police accused a father and son duo of killing 15 people during a Jewish celebration at Sydney's famed Bondi Beach. Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Employment Arun Hemachandra confirmed that no Sri Lankan was injured in the shooting incident.
The incident has raised several questions on Australia's gun laws, which are held to be among the toughest in the world. Police say the older suspect had held a firearms license since 2015, along with 6 registered weapons. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said his cabinet agreed to strengthen gun laws and work on National Firearms Register to tackle aspects including the number of weapons permitted by a single gun license and the validity period of the license. According to the police, the 50-year-old father of the 2 gunmen was killed at the scene, taking the tally of dead to 16, while his 24-year-old son is in critical condition in hospital. The 40 people taken to hospital after the attack included 2 police officers in serious but stable condition. The victims were aged between 10 and 87. National broadcaster ABC and other media identified the men as Sajid Akram and his son Naveed Akram. Home Minister Tony Burke said the father arrived in Australia in 1998 on a student visa, while his son is an Australian-born citizen. 2 flags of the militant group Islamic State were found in the gunman's vehicle, ABC News said without citing a source. Jews, the number about 150,000 of Australia's population of 27 million, with about a third estimated to live in Sydney's eastern suburbs, including Bondi. In the meantime, responding to an inquiry by Ada Derana, the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Employment, Arun Hemachandra, confirmed that no Sri Lankans were injured in the shooting incident at Bondi Beach yesterday. The Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Employment, Vijitha Herath, extended his condolences, expressing solidarity with Australia and reaffirming strong opposition to terrorism. President Anurakumara Dissanayake, taking to X, stated that Sri Lanka strongly condemns the terrorist attack at Bondi Beach, adding that Sri Lanka stands in solidarity with Australia and reaffirms that violence and hatred have no place in our societies.
Welcome back to First at 9. Sri Lanka's economy grew by 5.4% in the third quarter of 2025. The Department of Census and Statistics reports that GDP increased to 3.32 trillion rupees in the third quarter of 2025, up from 3.15 trillion in the same period of 2024. Sector-wise, all major activities recorded growth in the third quarter, with agriculture rising by 3.6%, industry by 8.1% and services by 3.5%. The Colombo Bourse closed in negative territory today as a result of price losses in counters such as Colombo Dockyard, Selinco Holdings and Commercial Bank of Ceylon. The benchmark ASPI lost 0.95% to close at 22,294.77, while the more liquid S&P Sri Lanka 20 decreased by 0.74% to end the day at 6,052.30. Market turnover was 2.22 billion rupees. Foreign participation in market activity remained at subdued levels, with foreigners closing as net buyers, purchasing shares worth 88 million rupees. Up next is Dinuka Darbasena from Capital Alliance with a few thoughts to round off our Markets in View segment for the week.
Sri Lankan equities closed significantly stronger last week as the SPI rose 4.7% to 22,508, while the S&P SL20 advanced 2.9% to 6,097. Trading activity saw a sharp increase, with market turnover rising by 26.6 week on week to 21.5 billion rupees. Meanwhile, the last week Treasury bill auction raised 48 billion rupees, with yields across the 3, 6 and 12 months maturities remaining unchanged.
A national survey titled Building Resilient, Inclusive Growth and Holistic Transformation in Sri Lanka, conducted by the International Food Policy Research Institute and the International Water Management Institute, was launched recently in Colombo. Experts joining the launching ceremony complained of a major lacuna of data in forming proper policy decisions. They emphasized the need to focus on data pertaining to real wages and the need to adopt pro-poor policies in the nation's attempt to accelerate growth following the economic stability.
The national survey named Building Resilient, Inclusive Growth and Holistic Transformation in Sri Lanka, conducted by the International Food Policy Research Institute and the International Water Management Institute under the CGIAR Science Programme on Policy Innovations, a global research partnership was launched recently in Colombo.
Policy is a powerful lever, and that evidence-based policy is the best or a desirable way to take forward. We really look at bringing two policy spaces such as this to set agendas, to identify entry points for effective actions, to test solutions and the scaling of those solutions, and to look at a wide range of governance and financing options that help to deliver the kinds of policy efforts and instruments that are needed to create the change that we want to see in this world.
Sri Lanka today is emerging from the worst economic crisis in its history that has caused immense suffering, especially for the poor. Today the economy is stabilized and the debt has been restructured. The challenge now is to resume growth and protect the poor and vulnerable members of society. And the key to both of those are pro-poor policies. The fact is that Sri Lanka has in the past adopted pro-poor policy with favorable results. In the 1980s, they introduced a cash transfer program, Samurthi, which brought poverty rates down, especially since it enabled the country to stop the wasteful and untargeted rice subsidy program. But the problem is that these pro-poor policies were not sustained. In some cases, they were reversed. Trade policy has become increasingly closed since the mid-2000s. The trade ratio, the sum of imports plus exports divided by GDP, has fallen by a half. And not surprisingly, economic growth has slowed. Another reason for the slow growth is the low productivity of agriculture. And one reason for that is the Paddy Lands Act of 1957, which requires farmers who lease land to grow only paddy, even if it is the least productive crop. The Paddy Lands Act keeps poor farmers poor. Likewise, Samurthi has become weakly targeted because it has been captured by politicians as a way of currying favor with their constituents, many of whom are not poor. So the question is, what can be done? The only option, really, is to speak to the voters directly. And this is the real power of the Bright surveys.
Incomes and poverty. So one thing I would really urge the government, civil society and the press to do is to monitor real wages more. Right? So Sri Lanka is a highly wage-based economy, both formal, informal, and that data is collected monthly by the central bank along with food prices. And real wages are a very good predictor of incomes and poverty in a country like Sri Lanka, and in fact they play a very important role in the World Bank's micro-simulations on poverty estimates. Moved to Sri Lanka in 2021, the crisis hit in 2022. When you see how quickly things were changing in Sri Lanka, it was crying out for data. In March 2022, the Sri Lankan Prime Minister met with the head of the CGIAR, which IFPRI and IMIA is part of, and directly stated they want CGIAR support for economic revival in rural villages and households, including innovations that integrate livelihoods, food and nutrition security and resilience. However, Sri Lanka had no widely multi-thematic household surveys, no large-scale open access panel surveys, and like many countries, it infrequently collects national cross-sectional surveys like HIS or the DHS. So you can measure poverty, but can you understand it if you're not measuring the drivers of poverty? That's really critical. And research for development faces a major funding crisis, as we all know. So we strongly urge the audience, as you're listening today, think about ways to fund Bright, to collaborate, to coordinate, and think about ways we can do more surveys and more research in the future.
This survey not only provides the information contained in the HIS, but it expands on the information available, which enables us to do even more things. We have been talking about climate change and how it affects vulnerability. For the first time in the Bright survey, we have information where we can look at how the climate change is affecting the livelihoods of people. For example, we know that 20% of farmers face severe climatic shocks and 40% face moderate shocks. 74% farmers indicated that their earnings were affected due to climatic events. So these are very important information that we should take into account when designing policies.
When we talk about policy, it's important that governments, for instance, set targets and that they're held accountable for achieving those targets. That also means that we actually set up systems that can provide continuous data on these very important indicators that we hear about.
That's all for tonight from First at 9. Thank you for joining. Have a great night.